x squared plus 64 over 25 equals 0. So what you can see here is a perfect square, and there as well. Now, when can you remember us solving perfect squares? What part of perfect squares can you remember? Perfect
Uh,
squares, yeah?
Quadratics?
Yeah, and difference of
Oh,
two squares, right? If we had x squared minus 64 over 25 equals 0, then it's quite easy to say
yeah.
it's going to be 8 over 5 plus 8 over 5 equals 0. But now, because we've introduced a plus over here, we still want to have a minus. So how do I change this so that it becomes that? And this is where complex numbers comes in, because complex numbers allows you to factorize this using difference of squares. So you can factorize, you can actually go x minus 8 over 5 I x plus 8 over 5 I and y. Let's have a look at y. Because if I take 8 over 5 minus I and I multiply it by 8 over 5 plus I end up with 64 over 25 negative I squared.
Yeah.
And that's negative 64 over 25 times negative 1, which is 64 over 25, which means that you still end up back there, but except you can allow a plus in there. So when you multiply those two, you'll end up with a plus 64 or 25. So in this case here, we're using the concept of difference of squares to factorize that over there. So this is not the final answer yet. So the answer is going to be, now we take each part. We're going to go x equals 8 over 5i, or x equals negative 8 over 5i. So we have two possible answers, and then we're done. All right,
Is this
let's.
like extra related?
So you know what we'll do? Let's multiply this out. Let's multiply this out, right? So let's um, let's take this over here and say, okay, well, if I've got x squared, no, if I've got x minus 8 over 5, I, and let's actually multiply that. Let's just check why this would be true. This becomes x squared plus 8 over 5 I x minus 8 over 5 I x minus 8 over 5 I squared. Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so those two cancel, right? They're the same. So you're left with x squared minus 8 over 5 I all squared, right? And
Yeah.
we've got to solve this part here, which is basically x squared minus 64 over 25 if I distribute the squared in carefully, and I squared, which is negative 1. So it becomes x squared. That becomes negative 1. So negative 1, negative times a negative is a positive. So positive 64 over 25. And it goes back to the question, right? You can see that. Okay, back to the question. All right, so you did C, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a look at C. So C, I've got 12x squared plus 3 equals 0. I can firstly take out a common factor of 3, because by doing that, I've now released perfect squares. I've got a perfect square over there and a perfect square over there. And what you do is you factorize it like you would if it was a negative. You put 2x, 2x, 1, and 1, plus and minus. But instead of 1, you just write I at the end. And that creates the positive automatically. So all you're doing is you're simply placing I on the constant terms in the brackets in each of the binomials. When you multiply it out, it'll go back there, and therefore you now can take it to your final answer, which is 2x equals I, x equals I divided by 2, or 2x equals, this is supposed to be equals I, this one's supposed to be negative I, Yeah, so x equals negative I over 2 and positive I over 2. And that's the final answer for those.